Well, 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 looky here, you guys. Here we are, down under in glorious Melbourne, the city where they say you get all the seasons in a single day. I have to say, so far, we've mostly got rain in every single day, apart from today, actually, which is uh, very different. It's lovely, blue skies and sunshine. But anyway, we're here, safe and sound, and having a fabulous time. Actually, this is where I am. Let me just show you. This is the yard here. It's kind of good, isn't it? So that's this little lovely oasis where I can sit here and have my coffees every day and talk to you. So welcome to the Aussie Holy Shed, where we'll be for the next little while. Very, very exciting, exciting, exciting. And speaking of Melbourne, I want to begin with a quote from the utterly fabulous Melbourne singer Nick Cave, though he now lives mainly on the south coast of England. But in his recently published book, which is called Faith, Hope and Carnage. It's a record, really, of a series of conversations, mainly during lockdown, between Nick and his journalist friend Sean O'Hagan. And at one particular point, Nick says that prayer, he says, prayer is about, and I quote here, making a space within oneself where we listen to the deeper, more mysterious aspects of our nature. I like that very much. Now, he's not excluding God there. I know he says that we're listening to the deeper, more mysterious aspects of our nature. He's not excluding God. He isn't saying that prayer is simply a conversation with oneself, but he does believe that this is where we encounter God in the profound mystery of life within ourselves. But I especially love this idea that prayer is a way of creating an inner space where we can experience God, but also commune with our deeper self and nature. In our last session, I talked about how science increasingly throws light on prayer and how it might work with things like the butterfly effect and quantum entanglement theory. Now, I've had lots of lovely responses from people to this, appreciating what I was talking about, and including this from someone who has the online handle Apocalypse Survivor. So I don't know his name. He's just an Apocalypse Survivor. So let me just pull up and tell you what he says. He says, "At times, prayer sometimes feels like an echo chamber, and talking to myself more than anything else beyond. However, I am aware of what scientific discoveries are revealing about the quantum entanglement theory, and that our intentions and our observations fundamentally affect the behavior of particles. It's therefore, he says, since God is in all things rather than a distant monarchical figure, it's therefore no big leap to see prayer as something that matters and does influence reality and outcomes, even he says, if I sometimes feel alone and abandoned when praying. So thank you very much for that, Apocalypse Survivor. I really appreciate all your comments. As you know, art plays a large part in my spiritual and theological understanding. So today I want to share with you this picture by the 19th century artist Jean-Francois Millet, whose work, I have to tell you, I completely love. The painting is called The Angelus. It's probably his most famous piece, and it resides in the Louvre in Paris. It was originally called Prayer for the Potato Crop, and I think you can see why that would be perfectly reasonable. But then Millet added the steeple to the picture and renamed it. Now, for those of you who are listening to the audio podcast, let me tell you the painting is bathed in a sublime evening light with warm colours, and it depicts centrally two rural peasant figures alone in a huge empty plain. The man is holding his cap reverently with bowed head, and the woman facing him is also bent forward, clasping her hands. And then, as I say, in the distant background is the spire of a church. And what we can see here is that work is paused. It's a working situation which is paused for the Angelus daily prayer, which would be prompted by the church bell. At the woman's feet, there's a basket of potatoes, being filled up, and there's a barrow with sacks, and also a pitchfork stands spiked into the ground. It's it's a moment of serene stillness, of intentionality, of everyday life briefly placed on hold. The Angelus, if you're not familiar with it, is a Catholic prayer which roots back to the 13th century. It's recited 3 times a day at the ringing of a bell, usually at 9 in the morning, at noon, and then 6 in the evening. And each recitation includes 3 Hail Marys, interspersed with antiphons and responses. It's not part of my own tradition, though I have enjoyed participating in it on many occasions. And, on the bigger sort of scale of things, I find rhythmic prayers and practices like this helpful and enriching, not so much for the details of the content, more for the actual practice itself. It's prayer through actions and gestures that I find very helpful in these kind of rituals. Indeed, I think the beauty of many ancient spiritual practices and also traditional liturgies is that the very repetition that they require ends up shifting attention away from any kind of focus or concentration on the verbal content to other things, hopefully to a deeper spiritual instinct, to other feelings. So the words really become a vessel or a channel for something else. And I think this is actually how the traditional version of the Lord's Prayer operates for many people at, say, a funeral. And I've seen this so much over the years, where many non-churchgoers can recite the prayer without looking at the words, without thinking about the words, um, and yet really appreciate the practice of saying it. It's as if they sense a connection with something else, which may be, with their childhood, or saying the prayer at school with family members, or maybe, and I think certainly watching people at the funeral, it sort of seems to evoke a connection with the person that they are bidding farewell to. And beyond all of this, it prompts a sense of connection with something beyond, the divine, whatever. But it's the interruption of normal mundane life that Millet encapsulates in this painting so beautifully. The call to pay attention to something different, yet also familiar. The liturgy of the Angelus rehearses the visit of the angel Gabriel to Mary, announcing the promise of the Christ child. It's the Annunciation, and also her response, her yes to the promise, her yes to God, be it unto me, which is the central point of the narrative, but it's also the central point, I think, of this painting. I think it's what I like about the Angelus, the practice, because beyond the story of Mary, it invites me to say yes to life with all that life holds. The welcome things and the challenging things, the exciting and the intimidating, believing that it's always in the moment that we encounter the divine. I think it's fair to say that God lives in the moment. We don't experience God in the past or in the future. God is always alive and present in the moment. And when we dwell, when we abide, when we pause to be in the moment in an intentional way, I think that's when, more than any other time, we encounter the divine. Millet painted this picture in the midst of the turbulent instability of 19th century France in the aftermath of the French Revolution, Napoleon, and the Revolution of 1848. It was a highly turbulent, highly politicized era where Millet's preoccupation, which he did have with poor peasant figures, brought an amount of scrutiny to his work, and the suspicion that there was, a covert political agenda behind his work. Because, at the time, on the political right, peasants were perceived as violent, dangerous sources of, social upheaval. On the political left, they were seen as heroes. They were seen as a vanguard of liberation. Um, but despite all of that, Millet himself refuted any particular political ideology. He wasn't a propagandist, that's for certain. He was a contemplative. I think all painters, or many painters, are often contemplatives, and I certainly think Millet was a contemplative who loved to portray silence, and that's an amazing thing to do. It's almost a contradiction, isn't it, that you can paint silence, but he evokes silence in his pictures, and often it's in twilight. This particular picture is as evening is drawing on, and there are often solitary peasants. But at that juncture in time where he was painting, and given his own background, which was the son of poor landed farmers, it was impossible to isolate these images that he was painting, of rural poor people as sort of stooped, exhausted, and yet honourable. It was impossible to separate that from, political messaging and political implications. Millet, just to mention this, became an enormous influence on other artists like Gauguin, Cézanne, even Picasso, and especially Vincent van Gogh, who created a number of his own after Millet versions of Millet's paintings, including the Angelus, and I love his painting of the Angelus too. I think, that the painting is not simply a depiction of prayer, which it is. I think the painting, well, for me anyway, is itself a prayer. It has an iconic sort of quality to it. It emanates numinosity, a brooding spiritual presence. I find it invites me, as an icon does, to enter into and go beyond that which it is portraying. It's pointing us to something more. I'm just leaving you for a moment with it. It's such a beautiful image. But coming back to the interruption to everyday life, which the Angelus represents and is captured in the painting, it's that I find so appealing. That inbreaking, that crack in time, that interruption in which we are called to connect with something within, but also beyond the circumstances of ordinary life. Islam, has something like this too in the Adhan, calling Muslims to prayer 5 times a day. Now, for most of us, these kind of formal prayers will not fit with where we are at, but that doesn't mean that the principle can't be helpful to us. Whatever our faith tradition, or even if we have no particular faith tradition, a practice of pausing in the midst of ordinary life or mundane activities in the day for a moment of contemplation or mindfulness, this can be profoundly enriching and health giving, I would say, to our lives. What I love about Millet's picture is that there's no sacred and secular divide here. Yes, there's the church with its implied bell ringing over there, but that's not the central image. Central is ordinary life, humble working figures surrounded by their everyday work. This is their office, if you like, and there they are dressed in working clothes, but bowing in the midst of all of that to the mystery of life. They pause with intentionality, with sense of gratitude for mundane blessings. They acknowledge the mystery and say their own yes to that which is greater, to life, the universe, to God, by whatever name. Beautiful. The Angelus prayer is, of course, as I say, about angelic visitation. And I think that we're surrounded by angelic presences, messengers, bearers of goodness and hope. We don't need to believe in fluttering wings and halos and Sunday school images to believe in or experience the angelic. I think angels symbolize or embody the integration of earth and heaven. Ancient peoples, can teach us so much about the integration of the sacred and the mundane. For Aboriginal people here in Australia, or Maori people in New Zealand, or Amerindians in South America, North American Indians, all these kind of First Nation peoples around the world, for them, everyday life is sacred. The earth and its creatures are sacred. The world itself is sacred. Time is sacred. So everything, therefore, is holy. Everything is a potential sacrament or mediation of divinity. So it's not that the figures in the painting were engaged in secular work, which they set aside to devote themselves to a sacred activity. No, no, no. The work that they did every day was sacred, sacred activity. The issue in this picture is that of intentionality, of pausing specifically to become mindful of the sacredness, the mystery of ordinary everyday life. In the late 1990s, I spent the Michaelmas term at Westcott House in Cambridge, where people train for Anglican ministry. It was a pleasurable and very enriching time that I had there. Among other things, I was attempting to begin work on a follow-up to my first book, The Post-Evangelical. Didn't get very far with that, I'm afraid, but I enjoyed the libraries and went to some lectures and, had a lot of fun and made friends there. Each evening, I would join with other students and staff members too in the common room, where my mate Stuart, who was an ordinand at Westcott at the time, rather typically had set up a really well-stocked bar in the common room with real ale on tap from a cask. It's a very popular move there, and those evenings were just great fun. With wonderful camaraderie. But then every night, just before 9, the chapel bell would ring across the quadrangle, and we would all file out of the common room into a wonderful candlelit chapel, sometimes with incense gently burning there too. And we would be gathering there for COMPLINE, which, if you're not familiar with it, is a night prayer, a very ancient night prayer. I love COMPLINE, and I love those occasions. But most of all, I love that transition, of moving from drinking a pint of beer with friends and laughing and having camaraderie in the common room, to moving into this entirely different, very deeply numinous space. And but it wasn't a sacred secular thing. Fun and friendship in the common room was every bit as much a sacred activity as praying. But there was beauty in that pause, in that transition, in that liminality of moving into a place of intentionality, of gratitude, of being mindful of the preciousness of life and the presence of God among us. I enjoy the simple liturgy and prayers of COMPLINE, but for me, the words are not what I focus on. They are the hosts, the bearers, the gateway to something else. So I come back to what Nick Cave says. The prayer is about making a space within oneself, about making room to listen, to commune with our deeper self and the divine presence, which I believe lurks within each and every one of us. The thing about prayer isn't to get hung up on forms of words or on the challenging questions that prayer itself undoubtedly raises. I think prayer at its core is about being intentional, about pausing, like the figures in Millet's painting, becoming more aware, more mindful, more awake to the subtlety and wonder of life. I think prayer is also about being intentional in reaching out to those in need. I feel deeply about a friend struggling with depression or cancer or about someone's relationship falling apart. But prayer is making specific space for that concern, for my longing to become focused. Can it make a difference to the other people? Sometimes I think it does. Uh, Maybe particularly when it merges, my prayers merge with the prayers of others. But even if it doesn't make any great shake of a difference, um, I think I'm convinced that it communicates love, which is always a form of healing in itself. It also makes a difference to me, being intentional about gratitude or wonder or concern draws me into, greater wholeness as a person, draws me into the great cycle of life, which I think is such a precious thing. What Millet's painting of the Angelus prompts in me is the need and the desire to say yes to life every day, many times a day, to say yes to whatever life brings, to say yes to the life force of God's Spirit flowing through everything, stirring up joy and inspiring resilience. I think it's about learning to pause more in a hectic, sometimes dehumanizing world. Catch your breath, catch your bearings. I think this is all an important part of what prayer is, pausing in the midst of it all. So I'm going to pause myself there for now, and I'll come back and say more on another occasion. But let's pause for a prayer. I want to learn the salvific practice of pausing, of noticing, of turning aside, of not hurrying by on the other side, of paying attention to magnificent ordinariness, miracles of monotony. I don't know what to believe about angels, but I do know the world is crammed with presence, with numerous messages of hope and empowerment, urging us again and again to just say yes, say yes, say yes to this one beautiful, irrepressible life. Amen. Fantastic. Well, we are certainly going to fit in a toast, and I have one already poured here. It's a little spot of whiskey that we've been drinking in the household here, and so I'd like to invite you, if you've got a drink, to pour it now or to take it in your hand, and just briefly let me propose a toast to pausing, a toast to noticing, turning aside to see, a toast to curiosity, one of the greatest gifts we have, I believe. So, dear Sheds, there's a toast to life, L'chaim. Well, there we are for now. I'm going to come back to you again very soon. If you like the Holy Shed and what I'm doing here, you can still support us even though we're in Australia by buying us a coffee or two. You can go to the link which is on the screen now. It's always two at the top of the posts on the Holy Shed Facebook page. Thank you so much, lovely people, for supporting us in this way and lots of other ways too. It's really, really much appreciated. So we're just about there now, really. I'm going to finish in a moment with a video which I hope YouTube will not chop out. They sometimes do that, but it's something. Yeah, I don't know if I've ever played it before. I might have done. There's this wonderful brother called David Steindl Rast, a monk who's an elderly man now, and he's got such a wonderful sort of a voice that evokes heaven to me. And this is a little piece which is called Giver of All Good Gifts, which is very much in the spirit of what we've been talking about here today. So, meanwhile, I hope that you're having a good week. And yeah, I just bid you farewell from far away Australia. It's a funny thing, isn't it? This world, because, we all look up and we have the sense of sitting on top of the world, and yet some of us are down at here. Anyway, bogs my tiny little Liverpudlian mind. But thanks for being with me, and be kind to yourselves, dear friends. Be kind to those around about you. Stay human, and I'll see you soon. Enjoy this.
Giver of all good gifts, you have spread out the world before us like a feast, like a table that is set by your motherly love. Open our hearts to feast at your table, to show our gratitude by remembering all those who have so much less than we have, by letting some of our own wealth overflow to them, by making those who are lonely while we have friends and company, by making them less lonely, by being available for them, and make the whole world one big, joyful table fellowship. Eating together, singing together, dancing together, all in an overflowing of gratitude.